Texas was on the fringes of the Civil War, but that did not mean it was immune from attack. Part of the Union's strategy required that the Union control or blockade all southern ports. In October 1862, Union forces attacked Galveston with the intention of occupying the city. Although the Confederates anticipated such an effort, Southern defenders abandoned the city in early 1863. Despite this withdrawal, Confederate forces soon counterattacked and were able to retake the city, maintaining control of it for the remainder of the war. By its end, Galveston was the only major Southern port not under Union control. Although the Union failed to hold Galveston, it did not ignore Texas altogether. In September 1863, Union General Nathaniel Banks planned an expedition to land 4,000 troops at Sabine Pass. From there, the army intended to march inland to Houston and ultimately Galveston. These troops were transported by a fleet of gunboats and transport vessels sailing towards Sabine Lake. The only obstacle was a small Confederate position, Fort Griffin, often referred to as Fort Sabine, defended by just 47 men and 6 cannons under the command of Lieutenant Richard Dowling, an Irish-born barkeeper. In just 35 minutes of fighting, Dowling's artillery fired 107 rounds, disabling 2 Union gunboats and inflicting significant damage. The accuracy and rapid rate of fire convinced the Union commander that he faced a much larger force than was actually present, and he ordered a withdrawal. This engagement became known as the Battle of Sabine Pass and remains one of the most lopsided Confederate victories of the war. Banks returned in November 1863, capturing Brownsville at the mouth of the Rio Grande. However, the Union presence in South Texas proved temporary. Many of Banks's troops were soon transferred to Louisiana to participate in the Red River Campaign in the spring of 1864. By the summer, Confederate forces had recaptured Brownsville. While Union armies campaigned in Virginia and Mississippi, Texas played a critical supporting role for the Confederacy. The state produced food, uniforms, ammunition, and other materials essential for Confederate armies. States experiencing constant military occupation, such as Virginia, could no longer feed or supply themselves adequately. As a result, Texas farms became a major source of food for Southern armies. Confederate soldiers wore Texas-made uniforms, fired Texas-made bullets, and slept beneath Texas-made blankets. Texas also played a key role in undermining the Union blockade. While the Union Navy controlled much of the southern coastline, it could not effectively seal off the Texas-Mexico border. That border became a vital corridor through which Confederate cotton reached the world market. During the war, approximately 320,000 bales of cotton crossed the Rio Grande and were shipped abroad. As it had during the era of the Republic of Texas, Southern leaders hoped that cotton diplomacy would persuade European powers to recognize Confederate independence. However, the British Prime Minister, Henry John Temple, was the same man who would not recognize the Republic of Texas when he was foreign minister. Internally, Texas Confederates often dealt harshly with those suspected of aiding the Union. One particularly brutal example involved a Northern Methodist missionary who attempted to flee the state with his wife. Suspected of involvement in anti-Confederate activities, he was captured in Missouri by Texas forces and returned to Fort Worth. On the night of his arrival, a lynch mob hanged him. His body was buried the next day, exhumed 3 days later, and desecrated. They stripped the flesh from his bones, and children played with them. After this incident, Northern Methodist missions ceased operating in Texas. Another violent episode occurred in August 1862, when Unionists, many of them German immigrants from the Hill Country, attempted to flee to Mexico, where several planned to enlist in the Union Army. About a day's march from the Rio Grande, Texas state troops caught up with the group and attacked them near the Nueces River, killing 35 and wounding several others. The incident is commemorated by a monument in Comfort, Texas, the only pro-Union monument in the former Confederacy. The German on the monument is translated as "True to the Union." Fear and suspicion also consumed North Texas in late 1862. Earlier that year, the Confederacy had passed a conscription law that exempted men who owned 20 or more slaves, or who were connected to someone who did. These men could also hire substitutes to serve in their place. The law created the widespread perception that the war was a rich man's war but a poor man's fight, breeding resentment and dissent. In Cook County, north of Dallas, 30 men signed a petition protesting this exemption and sent it to the Confederate Congress. The local militia commander exiled the leader of the movement, but those who remained formed the basis of a Union League in Cook and surrounding counties. Rumors spread, many exaggerated, that the League had as many as 2,000 members and planned to seize arsenals in Gainesville and Sherman. In response, state troops moved in on October 1st. More than 150 men were arrested in Gainesville, and a so-called citizens' court was established. Of its 12 jurors, 7 were slaveholders, while none of the defendants owned slaves. Conviction required only a majority vote. 7 prominent Unionists were sentenced to death, but events quickly spiraled out of control. A mob lynched 14 additional prisoners. A week later, 19 more were convicted and hanged. By the end, 42 men were dead, 40 of them executed by hanging. This was the largest mass hanging of the Civil War. Although major battles did not rage across Texas, civilians still endured the same hardships as those in other Confederate states. With men away at war, women managed farms and households. Texans faced severe shortages of coffee, medicine, clothing, and shoes. Families relied on homespun garments, and Governor Francis Lubbock symbolically wore a homespun suit at his inauguration in 1861. Texans would find substitutes for everyday necessities. Salt was in such short supply that some families dug up the floors of their smokehouses to leach salt from the dirt. Thorns were used as pins, wallpaper replaced writing paper, and some newspapers ceased publication due to a lack of supplies. Like the rest of the Confederacy, Texas ultimately witnessed the demise of slavery even before the ratification of the 13th Amendment. Yet Texas played one final role in sustaining the institution. After the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect in 1863, slaves across the South fled toward Union armies in search of freedom. In response, slaveholders from other states moved their slaves into Texas, hoping to keep them beyond Union reach. By the end of the war, roughly 50,000 enslaved people had been brought into the state, increasing Texas's enslaved population from about 182,000 to 230,000. Slavery in Texas officially ended on June 19, 1865, when Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston and announced the enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation. With the war over, new questions emerged. What would freedom look like for formerly enslaved people? How would the former Confederate states be reintegrated into the Union? Those questions would define the next chapter of American history: Reconstruction.